Where is your favorite place on Earth? If you're like me, Montana's pretty hard to beat. It's an easy place to call the last best place. I'm hoping it remains so for my children and theirs. I'm not sure just what all I can do to make sure it stays the best place, but I know there are people working on it. When you look closely at our state, you find a wide variety of landscapes that go together to make it special. Let's quickly look at some of the last best places in Montana. Montana's northwestern mountains create the vision many tourists hold of Montana, but they are also home to a wealth of fish and game species sportsmen cherish, such as mountain goats and ptarmigan. Grassland communities occur in the broad western mountain valleys, high mountain meadows, and on the plains of eastern Montana. This community type is essentially associated with more terrestrial species that have the greater need of conservation than any other community type in the state. This ecosystem, not surprisingly, is a canopy of sagebrush and associated grass shrub communities. Montana's riparian and wetland communities generally represent the green zones along rivers, streams, lakes, and reservoirs and include potholes, wet meadows, marshes, fens, and cottonwood forest. The 59,000 miles of mountain streams of western and central Montana are typically cold and clear and serve as the headwaters for all major river systems in the state. There are at least 91,000 miles of prairie streams in Montana that have water either intermittently or permanently flowing through them in an otherwise dry region. These facts provide the essentials for measuring and managing the last great place. Let's get right down to the land itself and imagine our first night at elk camp this fall. You're sitting around the campfire with your closest hunting friends with a mug of steaming coffee or a tin cup of whiskey, reminiscing about past years in this same hunting unit and wondering where in tomorrow's first light you might find your bull. Around the warm campfire, you talk about many hunting memories and of the pure joy of simply being out in the wild, rifle in hand, like Theodore Roosevelt might have done 100 years ago. But before the fire burns out, each of you must determine where you will go alone in the dark and cold tomorrow morning. The place you decide on might be exactly the right one to find a bull, and then again it might not. One thing's for sure, you can't sit in camp and do nothing. Elk aren't going to come to you. You quickly surmise that Theodore Roosevelt himself probably pondered just such a first night in his favorite hunting camp when he told his audience, "In any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing is the wrong thing, and the worst thing you can do is nothing." Theodore Roosevelt, our 26th president, developed a love for hunting and conservation, and he victoriously led the charge of the Rough Riders up San Juan Hill in 1898. He crowned his conservation life by leading the charge to protect nearly 230 million acres in national forest, federal bird reservations, and national parks and monuments in an era when most politicians wanted to exploit America's limitless natural resources without regard for the future. Now, 100 years later, we're in a new era, the era of a changing climate, and Roosevelt is no longer here to lead the charge for conservation from his bully pulpit. Now it's up to us to carry the water. In 2008, 8 leading hunting and fishing organizations released Season's End, highlighting the impacts of climate change on fish and game in the United States and its implications for sustainable hunting and fishing. In 2010, Beyond Season's End was released to present practical measures that could be taken on the ground to offset the most harmful effects of climate change on fish and wildlife, and at what cost. In discussions on global climate change, what are we really talking about? Scientists most often refer to these 4 physical measures. And we're not talking about short-term episodes of weather. This map shows that the sea level along both the east and west coast of the United States has risen nearly 2 inches since 1993. These are the measures most meaningful to Montanans. While glacier melt is not especially evident in Europe and the Andes, the dark green line in the middle shows it is significant in northwestern U.S. and southwestern Canada. The melting of Grinnell Glacier shows the effects of warming since 1938, with most of the ice now in a pool of meltwater at the base of the cliffs. Of the 150 glaciers in Glacier National Park in 1850, only 26 remain. This animated graphic shows the actual recession of glaciers in Glacier National Park from 1850 to 2010 and predicts that all glaciers in the park will disappear by 2030. Even if the predictions for the future are wrong, there's not much left to be wrong about. Between 1951 and 2002, the average air temperature around the world increased 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit, and the average temperature throughout the U.S. increased 1.25 degrees. But the average temperature in just Montana rose 2.3 degrees. What does that mean in the woods? Global annual precipitation increased 5.8% from 1951 through 2002, whereas annual precipitation in the U.S. increased 10.5%, and Montana's average precipitation increased only 3.1%. Montana has seen a greater increase in air temperature and lesser increase in precipitation in either the world or the U.S. as a whole. The change in the form and timing of precipitation greatly impacts water availability and may well be the most serious threat to fish and wildlife. Timing is everything. But an average annual precipitation increase of 3.1% does not tell enough of the story for a Yellowstone cutthroat trout. It's not so much the total annual precipitation that matters, it's the change from the snowpack in the winter to rainfall in the spring that is the more serious threat to fish and wildlife. Like all the other Rocky Mountain states, Montana's environment for fish and wildlife largely depends on winter snowfall that will melt and sustain stream flows through spring, summer, and fall. From 1951 through 2006, Montana's winter precipitation from snowfall declined over 17%. The increase in average annual precipitation in Montana largely comes from more rainfall in the spring, when we're seeing a 5.9% increase in precipitation. Spring rains produce rapid and short-term runoff, but do not sustain stream flow in the late summer and fall. Less snow, shown here by the red circles, and more rain have become a west-wide pattern in recent years. This graph shows the late summer rainfall decline in Montana, which means less stream flow and warmer water, jeopardizing cold water species like trout. Here's a good example of what declining snowpack means. Despite more spring rain, the Yellowstone River at Livingston has seen a steady drop in June runoff for more than 50 straight years. The lower June runoff and August rainfall translates into steadily declining late summer stream flows. Here's what a Yellowstone cutthroat trout sees: lower runoff and late summer stream flows and higher water temperatures that favor smallmouth bass. The purple shaded stream segments show the limits of smallmouth bass range, at least until recent years. Biologists tell us that trout habitat is becoming bass habitat. But for us fishermen, there's another reality on top of the water. Meanwhile, back in the woods, even the adaptable white-tailed deer need succulent vegetation and security, and is being threatened by beetle-infested forests with drier, less nutritious forage, to the point that even their populations may decline, especially with the incidence of more frequent forest fires, some of which are turning catastrophic. Wetlands, probably the most productive habitat type in the wild, will be threatened by less snowpack and lower runoff, leading to losses in waterfowl habitat and conversion to human development. Hey, the swamp is gone. Why don't we just pave it into a parking lot? When it comes to fish and wildlife in Montana and our future opportunity for fishing and hunting, it pretty much depends on water. How much is there, and when does it come? The physical evidence of climate change strongly suggests that we all need to enter the debate on the behalf of fish and wildlife. What's the outlook for upland birds under a changing climate in Montana? There's a real cost here for hunters. Big game will be adversely impacted in a variety of ways. Hunting is already a difficult endeavor. Unlike big game, waterfowl can move quickly and cover vast distances. Even so, no species can withstand the loss of 90% of its critical habitat base. What's the outlook for trout in Montana and the West? Change is not always good. Dr. Thomas Kimball, former director of the Arizona Game and Fish Department and the Colorado Division of Wildlife, and later the CEO of the National Wildlife Federation, said in 1981, "Man is an integral part of the animal kingdom. As our environment becomes less livable for the subjects of the kingdom, it also becomes less suitable for the king. The status and trends of species diversity and the condition of fish and wildlife populations are the litmus test of a healthy human environment. Man and wildlife, we're all in this together. So what are we going to do? We can't go any lower, and we sure can't go any higher. We're simply going to have to adapt to the world and the climate we live in."